Okay, well, thank you very much, everyone. I so appreciate your time and your energy. Most of you know who I am. I've been with Broadview Networks for a long time now, over 12 years. And uh, if you know me, then you know a little bit about who we are. If you don't know me and are just getting to know what we do here at Broadview, hopefully at the end of this event, you'll have a better understanding. Peter Swoboda is Director of Engineering, and he is integral to our security practice. And Peter will be presenting the bulk of today's event. And John Martinek is our security resource and solutions expert and expert in almost all things Microsoft 365. So he's a part of our team and a part of our presentation today as well. Before we jump into the presentation, I do want to just give you an overview and a refresher really around who we are and what we're doing in the market, sustainability, and our ability to continue to deliver services to our market. We want to be measured by other organizations, not only in Manitoba, not only across the country, but across North America and even internationally. So we do spend energy, time, and resources to get those benchmarks and have our peers take a look at who we are and what we do and measure us against some of the best. And we're very proud of this. So we've earned a number of awards in that arena. It's also very important to Broadview Networks that we give back to the community, and we give back to the community in a number of ways. Every member of our team here participates in community events. It's just part of our culture. And I don't know if the folks on the meeting today know that about us, but I think it's an important thing to share. So that's who we are and what we do, and a little bit more about the depth of our organization. But we are a business, and we've been a business for almost 20 years here in the market, starting with 3 partners and growing to a team of 38 and a team of external partners that complements us. And we focus on helping organizations modernize their business, increase their productivity, reduce costs where it makes sense. And today's focus is really around reducing risk. But the portfolio does contain our ability to enable on the Microsoft 365 platform. We've got a very mature managed service practice that's dedicated and focused to managing not only our clients' infrastructure at a number of different levels and different tiers, but managing the data center infrastructure as well as the endpoint infrastructure. We've got a very mature managed security services practice, and Peter will talk about that in more detail. A few years ago, we purchased a small training company and folded into our Broadview Networks umbrella, and Broadview Academy complements what we do in other areas by delivering IT solutions. Pardon me, IT learning and enablement solutions. Excuse me just a minute. I don't know if people can hear that.
Okay, I'll probably jump in. I think Nora was wrapping up. We did, I think, lose Nora, but I think she was on her last little bit. She's going to transition over to me in a second. So I'll jump in and allow Nora to finish off if there was anything else she wanted to cover later on. So basically, yeah, this solution we really wanted to talk to you about today is this process that we've developed. And let me just share my screen so you can follow along with me here. There we go. Just give it a couple seconds. So the whole security program and we've the feedback from this has been phenomenal lately. Actually, it's this 3-step process that we've developed, right? And ultimately, it's a process to get you a security governance program in place at your organization. So the first step really starts with an assessment, right? So the idea is that you do an assessment against an industry standard. Most of our assessments are against the Center for Internet Security, CIS standard. I'll talk a little bit more about that specific one, but we're not limited to just working with CIS. There's a number of them, which kind of assesses the organization. Where you're at, where are the gaps, And as part of the assessment process, as you'll see today, I'll kind of explain how we do these assessments. You also have a very clearly outlined roadmap or a business plan ultimately that'll drive you into phase 2, which is your remediation, right? So after the assessment, you'll have a clear, concise list of where the gaps are, prioritized. You'll have some budgets available or presented to you in terms of how much remediation may cost. And then you enter this remediation phase where you're going to be for some time, probably the most lengthiest phase in all this is the remediation, or the most difficult, I should say, because that's really when you're trying to fix everything. But ultimately, once you get yourself to this level of security that you're comfortable with as an organization, so there's always going to be some risk. It's really hard to eliminate all risk within an organization, but you're going to get to a point where you're at this comfortable maturity rating within the organization. And at that point, you'll enter phase 3, which is kind of the security governance program. So it's maintaining that level of security that you've now achieved, doing annual reporting, reassessments occasionally, and entering that whole process of continuous improvement. So that's really kind of the 3-step process in a nutshell. From here, I'll kind of go over kind of the CIS framework, which, like I said earlier, the majority of our assessments are based on. We're definitely not limited to this. What we've done a lot in the past, especially around financial institutions and insurance organizations and so on, we can actually augment. We can mix and match certain frameworks. We can pull different concepts that your organization is mostly interested in. Some of the big ones we've done assessments against are things like the OSFI framework, which is specific to financial institutions. There was a DGCM, similarly in that financial sector. CIS obviously is big. There's NIST. So there's all sorts of these frameworks, right? So the presentation today will be focused around CIS, but keep that in the back of your minds as well, is that we're not limited to any specific framework. We do assessments against all sorts of things. So within the CIS, it basically outlines security in these 20 domains, right? So, it basically looks at the inventory of hardware and software, vulnerability management, audit logs, malware defenses, boundary protection, and so on. I'm not going to go down this whole list. If you're not familiar with CIS, definitely can Google it. The Center for Security Critical Security Controls, CIS-CSC. That's kind of the framework we're working with. And it basically, as within all of these domains of security, there's going to be a number of specific controls that we'll be evaluating. So over those 7 to 9 hours of interviews, we'll do deep dives into all of this and collect the information that you would need from you to be able to kind of assess where the gaps are within your environment. Now, the way we assess each of these controls is also not just a binary yes or no, yes, I'm compliant, no, I'm not compliant. We're really trying to assess the maturity of each and every single one of those controls. So we'll give you a score between 0 and 5 for each control. I'll go a little bit over how this maturity model works and what each of these scores mean, so you have a better understanding of what we're trying to evaluate here, really. But we're using the common maturity model, the CMM methodology. We didn't make up these scores. These are kind of once again industry kind of backed. It's a kind of open model that we've leveraged to be able to use that to rate the maturity level of security within organizations. So level 0 basically is kind of you're not compliant, right? If it asks you, do you have a firewall? 0 means you don't have a firewall. And then from there on, we can get to level 1, which is kind of something's being done, some ad hoc activity. You don't really have a good process defined yet, but you may have some technologies, maybe some firewall rules in there, but not a whole lot. So you're really doing something, but you're not really meeting the full intent of the control yet. So that's kind of your bare minimum of 1. From there on, you can achieve a score of 2 out of 5. Once you're fully meeting the control's objective, you have a very understood, well understood process around meeting that control, although you don't have any documentation yet. So this is where policies and procedures starts coming in, right? So you as an organization should not only be doing certain things, but they should be documented as well. You should have procedure documents, you should have process documents, and you should have policies around how you as an organization is adhering to security overall, and what technologies you have in place and things like that, right? So that high level security policy, which is really where that 3 out of 5 score comes in. Once you have defined policies, procedures around how you're meeting your security objectives, you can now score a 3 out of 5. Moving on from there, a score of 4 out of 5 is achieved once your processes and policies and all this documentation you have is now well communicated. I can't stress how many times there's organizations that, although they have everything documented, nobody even knows that it exists, right? So that's that difference between the 3 and the 4. So now that you're a 4, your whole organization knows where to find these policies, procedures. They're being followed. You have some sort of metrics available to show that your process is being followed. And that will get you that 4 out of 5. From there on, the maximum score, a 5 out of 5, is achieved once you have a process for continuous improvements. So now you're always going to be kind of reevaluating what else can we do better, how can we automate things, how can we integrate things, processes to work together, maybe software to work together to make us more productive, and constantly evaluating, how to make things better. We'll get you that maximum score of 5 out of 5. So we go through all these 20 controls. We give every single one of the controls. There's probably close to around 140 controls or so that we go through. Each of them will be given a score, and then we basically consolidate all that information into a report of findings document, which I'll go into next. Report of findings. So this is basically the first deliverable you can expect from one of these assessments. I'm going to scroll through some of this, executive summary, recommendation adopting. So basically recognizing the fact that you've now adopted an industry recognized framework, which is really important because a lot of organizations these days, they may think they have a pretty good security program in place, but what always bites them is it's the unknowns, is the stuff they haven't thought about, right? So the intent here is that you want to align to something that the whole industry has defined as something that organizations should be doing. It's industry backed. It's there's a lot of feedback that goes into developing these types of frameworks. So really, you as an organization need to ensure that you're aligning against one of these frameworks, and that deserves commendation. The fact that you are able to that you've aligned your security program to an industry standard. Now, if someone ever asks you, what are you doing to secure my data, especially for any kind of services organizations or anything, or but if you have your customers' data housed within your environments, that becomes really important to ensure that your customer feels safe, that their data is protected while it's stored within your environment. So they may ask you questions like, what are you doing to protect my data? And now that you've aligned to a standard, you can basically give them a summary report of this. I probably wouldn't give them the whole report, but you can do like a short version of this report and present it to them, saying, okay, we're aligned with CIS. Our maturity rating on the CMM scale is about a 1.7 right now. However, we have a security program in place. By the end of year 2, we're going to expect a 5. Here's all the things we're working towards, et cetera, et cetera. If you can show that to other institutions that you have that type of program in place, they're going to be extremely happy. So it's not it's the fact that you're adopting one of these standards is great. The fact that you have this program in place now shows extreme maturity as well. Because the reality is many organizations have a very poor security posture at the moment. I mean, this isn't just in Canada. This is a global issue still, right? I mean, a lot of organizations are just starting to adopt security and really aligning against one of these frameworks. So it's really important to kind of mention all that. The next few pages kind of once again talks about the scores and the methodology a little bit. The summary of findings section will kind of bring to your attention, the high level findings of where the gaps were. Let's say you need to designate a designated person to be responsible for security within the organization, or someone that's ultimately accountable for making sure that risk is minimized and so on. Implementing vulnerability management programs, patch management, et cetera, right? So this all comes out from that assessment. So we basically summarize some of the gaps that may be uncovered, and ultimately we give you an average score, right? So once again, this is based on that maturity rating model. It's from 0 to 5. To see a score of around 0.5 is extremely common, actually, especially for organizations that, once again, as I mentioned earlier, that have not actually aligned themselves with an industry standard before, or that have never gone through an assessment. So even though your maturity program you may believe is pretty, it is good, what I found, even talking to people before and after assessments, they'll be like, oh yeah, I never really thought about that area or this area here. And then, there's all sorts of gaps that, institutions are just not aware of. So getting a pretty low score is quite common when you first do an assessment. However, once again, it's once you start uncovering this, you can boost this up to a 2 or 3 very quickly, right? Because if you remember, a 2 out of 5 basically means you're adhering to all the controls. A 3 out of 5 is a big boost in score once you actually have policies and procedures defined. So if you actually have a set of security policies in your organization, and you can adhere to, maybe even 70% of the standard, you'd probably be around a 2.5 already, which would be a very good score. And that's something you probably want to set yourself as a goal for over the next, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, whatever the budget really is, right? But you want to have that plan in place, which we help you create, actually. Right now, we're still looking over the report of findings document, but as you'll see very shortly, one of the other deliverables that we actually provide you as part of this assessment is an actual roadmap to remediation. So we help you prioritize some of these things and group them and so on. But more on that in a bit. This next page here is more of a once again a breakdown of how that score was derived. So if you have that average of 0.55, this here once again shows you the CIS categories. So you can kind of see where your strengths are versus your weaknesses. There might be some areas where you're doing better than others. Management likes to see this kind of stuff sometimes. Where do we have strengths? Maybe data recovery or backups are pretty solid, but there's weaknesses in all these other areas. So we present that to you in this kind of radar type graph as well, to see kind of where the biggest coverage is. We also do something unique to CIS, and this is a process we developed ourselves actually, is, we've actually mapped specific technological controls to the CIS standard. So basically this is a different way to show your gaps from a technological perspective. So you really need all these different types of technologies in your environment to be able to be compliant with all the controls within CIS. Now the beauty is, like, even though there's a lot of different controls here, or sorry, a lot of different technologies in here, the reality is these are probably maybe 4 to 5 products that you only need to be able to be compliant with this. Having on a UTM type firewall probably addresses at least 4 or 5 of these. IPS, web filtering, things like that. So, this doesn't mean you need 20 or so products, but these are the things that the products need to be able to do. So as we're going through assessment, as we're gathering all this information, we kind of present you back, these are the technologies that you may have, and we score this very simple, 0, 1, or 2. 0 means you don't have it, 1 means that you have it, but it's not really used to its full potential. There's gaps around configurations, or maybe not fully deployed yet. And then 2 is, yep, you're doing a good job. The technology is doing exactly what it should be doing, and you got that piece covered. So it's just a different take on presenting you the gaps. Remediation recommendations. This is where we, start to set that, where do you want to be? You're a 0.5 right now. How do you see yourself in 2 years' time? Now, a very common goal that most organizations work towards will be around that 3 to 4 out of 5 in the first 2 to 3 years. That's a very realistic goal you can set for yourselves. So that's really the next steps, right? That's the recommendation. Set yourself a goal that you're comfortable to work towards, and then start working towards it. The remainder of this document just kind of shows you the raw details of the assessment. So it basically shows you all of these controls that were assessed, the score, and then all the information that was collected throughout the interview. So, this just serves as a reference point on, the specific CIS controls that were evaluated. All right, so now you have this report of findings. You're probably pretty bummed out. Oh man, we only got a 0.5. Okay, help us boost that score, right? That's the natural next step. So deliverable number 2 that we give as part of the assessment is this roadmap worksheet document. So this is an Excel document, which once again has all your CIS controls in here and the scores that we received, the information that was gathered from all the interviews. But now we've added 2 additional columns to this. And this is where the groupings come in, right? So we try to group all of these gaps into logical projects that you can then undertake. So every single control is mapped to a project and a sub-project that ultimately translates to this implementation plan. So this pretty much resembles a calendar view. We call these things phases, not quarters. You can almost treat them as quarters. Like if your implementation, your remediation plan, let's say was, I want to have everything in place within 2 years, this would be exactly that. You can treat each one of these phases as quarters on a calendar, but that's not really the intent. Your remediation plan might take multiple years, more than 2 even, right? So if you don't have the resources at the moment, some things are maybe just not possible, whatever the case is, you may want to spread this out over 3 years, 4 years, whatever works for you. However, these phases do show you prioritization. So not only have we now grouped all the gaps that are uncovered from the assessment into projects, we've now prioritized these projects for you as well. So as part of phase 1, continuous vulnerability management and maintenance monitoring analysis of audit logs. These are maybe the 2 projects that are most critical for you at the moment. In phase 2, there's these 2 additional projects, and so on and so on. You're probably thinking right now, well, this project name doesn't mean a whole lot to me. What's part of that project? So that's where kind of some of these additional tabs down here come in for. So we if I'll kind of, this really is a working document. So as it's a dynamic document, you can make changes to this. You can keep track of your progress as well in this GRC dashboard tab here, which I'll talk to shortly. This is actually really cool. But it gives you kind of real-time tracking of how you're doing in your remediation. But if you want to just know at a high level, what do these projects actually entail? You can, these are all pivot tables. So if you expand out of the drop down for continuous vulnerability management, this is really talking about patch management, sensitive data scans, and vulnerability scans within the environment. Maintenance analysis and audit logs is all about having a SIM or some kind of advanced syslogging type solution that can analyze logs. Security awareness is all about the training pieces. So it gives you kind of a little bit more info and background about what each of these actually is. This other tab does this as well, but it actually maps back to the specific CIS controls. So controlled access based on the need to know. If you expand this out, these are actually the specific CIS controls that are being addressed by this project. So you have all this information at your fingertips. The other good one here is this control by control number, which basically allows you to map things between different standards. I mentioned earlier how what we're presenting today is all around the CIS standard. But if someone asks, are you compliant with NIST, or are you compliant with DGCM, whatever the case is, you can look up framework mappings quite easily. So this view here kind of shows you the control numbers. And there's also filters up here. So right now, we're filtering on the gaps. So anything that's scored a 0 or a 1, once again, the scoring says if you're sub 2, that means you're not meeting the full intent of the control. So, but you can spin this around and, let's take a look at your 2s, 3s, and 4s and 5s, right? So let's take a look at all the controls that you're actually compliant with. And now you can very quickly, if someone asks you, are you compliant with CIS 8.3, you can say yes, it's on this list. Or if someone asks you, are you compliant with PCI 3.2, you can look up the inter-framework mapping. What's PCI 3.2 on the CIS. That maps to control 6.1 and 5.8. And you can quickly see if you're compliant against that. So it helps in this inter framework mapping as well. All right, so we've grouped all the projects now for you. You have phases, which you can treat as prioritization phases, really. This is priority 1, this is priority 2, priority 3, and so on. Now you're going to start remediating this stuff, right? And you can keep track of that in this GRC dashboard view. So the government risk and compliance dashboard. I mentioned this is a dynamic spreadsheet. So as you're as you're updating your scores, as you're going through this, as you're remediating, you can keep track of updated scores, which will feed back into here, and then you can kind of keep track of progress quarter by quarter to see if you're on par of meeting that goal that you set for yourself. So let's say you want to be a 5 out of 5 in 2 years. So this is broken out over 8 quarters. This blue line symbolizes that goal that you're working towards, but this orange one symbolizes, your progress. Are you falling behind? Are you on par of meeting that goal, and so on? So you can keep track of this. And then this pie chart here really just kind of shows you, right now you're at 14% to being a 5 out of 5. This yellow piece here shows you the gap to your short-term goal, right? Let's say you want to be at 3 out of 5. So this is, what you still need to become that 3 out of 5, and then ultimately the blue is, getting your maximum 5 out of 5 score. All right, so we talked about the report of findings document, which is that high-level executive summary. You now have a remediation worksheet, which is fully dynamic, keeps track of your progress, maps everything back to projects for you. Now the kind of the last piece that majority of organizations have always asked us for. We haven't always provided this. However, 9 out of 10, or maybe even 10 out of 10, I should say, organizations that we've done assessments for, they always came back with the question, well, how can you help us with this, right? So, and that's really what the last document is all about. So this third document, let's bring it up here, is the roadmap for remediation document. I'll scroll back to the top. And this is, how can Broadview help you, right? How can we help you? So it actually gives you some budgetary numbers. It kind of gives you this project plan approach, or really it's a business plan at this point, right? So you're basically given a business plan after we're done this exercise with you. A little bit about roles. All right, the MSSP team. So this is, I want to pause here for about a couple minutes anyway. So as I mentioned earlier, this document presents how can Broadview Networks help you, get to that compliance level. You're probably going to have a lot of questions. You're probably going to need some help. At the bottom of this document, you'll actually see pricing, right, for all these things, all these projects that we've mapped in this calendar view. Every single one of these projects will have a price for you if you wanted to proceed with any remediation assistance from Broadview. Some of those projects will, if you need our help, they'll ultimately translate into a managed service offering. Like, for example, the maintenance, monitoring, analysis of audit logs, right? That's all about log monitoring. So we actually have a whole managed service around log monitoring. So some of these remediation items, if you do need our help, they'll basically leverage our MSSP team. So our security staff becomes an extension of your team, which is huge actually, right? Because a lot of organizations, you may not have a dedicated security person yet. You may not have a, security analyst that can, assist with all this stuff, or even a CISO. Not all organizations even have a CISO yet, right? So as part of the managed services team, our team becomes an extension of your team, and you have access to, CISO level execs, directors, senior consultants, project managers. If there's any big projects on the go, there's 3 tiers of support and support/analysts. So anything from your kind of day-to-day activity for, like I said, log monitoring or something, to tier 2 to tier 3s that can, be part of your incident response team if you're actually suffering a breach or anything like that. And then we also have report writers that put together any kind of reports for you. So always keep that in the back of your mind. I mean, if there's any of the solutions are actually part of a managed service offering, that whole team you're able to leverage. I'm going to flip through these next 2 pages. We've talked about all this. It's once again, it's the CIS frameworks, the scoring. This is in that remediation document as well. But now ultimately you get to the beef of this document, which is the budgetary pricing. So once again, you'll see all the project names here, which are mapped back to once again to this calendar view, right? This is that prioritized list of projects. You'll now be able to see each one of these project names here, the licensing required. We actually also have you fill out this little scoping questionnaire at the very beginning of, even before we jump into interviews, so that we have a good understanding of how many servers you have, how many workstations, which kind of helps us build out some of these budgetary pricing if there's any licensing fees that are required. So environment will give you pricing, budgetary pricing for continuous vulnerability management, let's say. So is it a MSSP type solution where it's a frequency payment paid monthly, quarterly, or recurring basically, or is it a one-time project fee? So you can see the frequency. You'll also have a column here with the price itself. Obviously, we don't have that for the presentation. Every environment is different, but you will have a pricing for each one of these projects as well. And yeah, this really is that. This is a pricing thing. This is how can Broadview help and allow you to start budgeting for all these projects that were uncovered. And we have a couple appendices that we add into the document as well. This is taken from that pivot view in the Excel document, really. But it makes sense to include it in this document as well, because it really, for each one of the projects listed above, these are the actual CIS controls that you'll be addressing if you, if you undertake one of these projects. So you have all the projects and the specific CIS controls that are addressed with each project, details about any licenses that were quoted above. And then that calendar view once again is provided to you as an appendix as well. So that's basically the whole process, right? I mean, I'm going to finish off on this note here. All right, this is basically where I started. So the 3-step process. So once you complete this assessment, you're going to be at the end of phase 1. You're going to be moving into your remediation phase. So now you're gonna, you got to think about, budgets and, how many of these projects that were outlined can you do yourselves? How many do you need our assistance with? And we can, have those further conversations with you and provide you some specific quotes or whatever you need to move forward with remediation. You'll ultimately get to the end of remediation, which will be a score that you're comfortable with. And then you're going to need to instill phase 3, which is, how do I maintain that score? How do I put in that process of continuous improvement? How do I reassess myself every so often, and so on? So I don't know if there's any specific questions. We'll probably open it up for a general Q&A at the end of today's call. I will transition over at this point over to John Martinuk, because as part of the CIS process, there's a few controls that talk about benchmarks. Right, so in this, in the details here, I can't remember exactly which control it is, but there's, there's specific controls that say that your environment has to be hardened, right? And that hardening process needs to adhere to some sort of benchmarks. So the Center for Internet Security also has a set of benchmarks defined, and when we start talking about Microsoft 365. Naturally, that's a big risk area for a lot of organizations that have moved to Office 365 or whatnot, right? So if you're leveraging Microsoft 365, there are all sorts of benchmarking solutions that we have for you. But I'll let John Martinuk, take you through some of the stuff that Broadview can help with here. So I'll go ahead on mute right now, and I'll just hand it over to you, John.
Thank you, Peter. As Peter mentioned, one of the CIS's valuable and outstanding offerings is their Microsoft 365 specific CIS benchmark. For those that haven't met me, my name is John Martinuk. I'm a security solutions expert here at Broadview Networks. I'm a CISM and CISSP holder, which separates us in the local market here. The CIS organization has developed over 100 benchmarks across 25 different product families. One of these is specific to Microsoft 365. The Microsoft 365 specific benchmark provides you with prescriptive guidance for establishing a secure configuration posture for your online Microsoft services. It includes recommendations for Azure Active Directory, including the free Azure AD and even the productivity or lowest Microsoft plans, for Exchange and SharePoint Online, Intune for mobile device management, OneDrive for business, Skype and Teams. So how are these benchmarks created? This doesn't apply to just Microsoft 365, but the CIS benchmarks are created using a consensus review process comprised of numerous subject matter experts. Participants provide their perspective from the ground level, so boots on the ground, first-hand experience, best practices coming from individuals in consulting, software development, audit and compliance, security research, operations, government, legal, and other areas. The intended audience for these benchmarks is for system and application administrators, security specialists, auditors, help desk, platform deployment personnel. We've talked about this before. Security really is everyone's responsibility in the organization. So anyone who even uses 365, never mind those that are developing, deploying, assessing. This really is solid, globally accepted best practice advice for anyone involved. The Microsoft 365 CIS assessment has numerous recommendations for the products I mentioned earlier. Each recommendation can be an automated or manual recommendation. Automated represents recommendations for which a control similar to the on-premise CIS controls can be fully automated and are typically a pass-fail state and include some form of automation. Manual controls represent assessment items where a control cannot be automated and there's manual steps required to validate the configuration. As Peter mentioned, with every organization being set up differently, these manual steps vary by organization, license type, and environment. A 365 CIS assessment has 2 levels. Level 1 assessments intend to be practical and prudent, provide a clear security benefit, and do not inhibit the use of the technology. Level 1 assessments, generally speaking, are for organizations that do not handle as sensitive or critical data such as health or financial information. Level 2 assessments are intended for environments like yours where security is paramount, data is sensitive, you have to follow other legal requirements related to that financial or health information. Level 2 assessments intend to act as a defense in depth measure, i.e. you have 2 or more controls for each area in a perfect world. Level 2 assessments and their remediation do take a bit more care and planning, as some of these items could negatively inhibit the use of technology, particularly if users are open to things being wide open. Very similar to an on-premise CIS assessment, deliverables of a Microsoft 365 assessment include detailed documentation around your remediation priorities specific to Microsoft 365 in the areas of account and authorization, application permissions, data management, email security, Teams security, SharePoint security, auditing, storage, and more. It outlines which configurations are considered a pass, controls that pass or fail. It outlines which items require regular review and how often and by whom, which of course we can help with, and then a breakdown of controls requiring further discussion, whether it's a licensing issue, configuration issue, or more. In this example here, this was a Microsoft 365 CIS assessment done against essentially productivity only licensing so one of the lower Microsoft licenses, and you can see that there's approximately 70 plus controls that we can evaluate and help you improve your security posture against. So how can we help? We can customize and tailor on-premise and online Microsoft 365 CIS assessments to organizations really of all license types and sizes. We can integrate the online 365 assessment against your on-premise assessment that Peter described. And whether it's offline or online, on-premise or not, we can map all of the controls to other frameworks that are required by your particular industry and organization. I'm going to turn it back to Nora now.
Hi, everyone. Hoping you can hear me now. I dropped off a little earlier.
Yep, we're good.
Good, excellent. So we wanted to be able to provide an overview of what Broadview can provide to your organizations in terms of security assessments, share with you and be transparent about our methodology and our skill set, and get feedback from you as to whether this resonates with you, and if you have questions that you'd like to have follow-up conversations with one-on-one, happy to accomplish that. But we have a small group here, and if there are questions for either John or Peter specifically, please raise your hand, and the floor is open for any open discussion at this moment in time. So just give me a sense as to whether you've got questions and that you'd like to propose. Excellent. I think I see Steve. Go ahead, Steve. I think you're on mute. There you go. Perfect.
I'm clicking it a lot and it's not changing. There we go.
I can hear you.
Okay, good. I have a question about CIS in general. So we've been through some CIS evaluations ourselves. And, you know, the reality of CIS, and I think a lot of the controls, is that implementing them all to a 5 out of 5 level for most organizations is not really practical. So my question is when Broadview does the assessment, do you actually offer an opinion at the end of the effectiveness of the controls that an organization has chosen to implement, and you know, how that fits into their security posture?
Yeah, it's a very interactive process. Like throughout the interviews, what typically happens is as we're going through these, as we're assessing every single control, these are the types of discussions that come up, right? Yeah, I mean, there's could be some controls that just don't make sense to implement as an organization. Ultimately, what needs to happen with those types of controls is that you'll need to do some sort of a risk analysis for your organization. You know, is it an acceptable level of risk to not be compliant against, you know, this specific control? And if that's the case, that's perfectly fine. Sometimes marks as not applicable. And then we usually, you know, provide some sort of backup information, documentation about, you know, why the organization has chosen to, you know, not be compliant against specific controls. So ultimately, it's a very interactive discussion, and you know, the report of findings also, you know, if there's certain things that so what we're finding is that these reports that we provide for you, they ultimately become, you know, they get used as leverage with upper management to get the money needed for some of the remediation efforts. So if there's anything in the reports that you'd like me to highlight, basically some you know, concerns, or you know, even things like, you know, certain controls don't make sense, what I typically do is I'll put in an additional section to kind of just go over those things that we discussed during the assessment that you know were of concern specifically to your organization, right?
Okay. So just so I'm clear, so at the end you offer an opinion. Do you also benchmark against other organizations of similar size and in the same industry?
Yes, there is. In the report of findings, there's basically a little section saying, you know, how does your score compare to other scores in a similar industry? So there is definitely a whole section around that.
Okay, good stuff. Thanks.
Perfect. Thanks, Steve. Does anybody else have a question they'd like to raise? at this point in time.
Yeah, feel free to raise your hand. But Steve did mention something interesting as we're waiting for more questions to roll in. Yeah, I mean, score of 5 out of 5 is pretty difficult to achieve. So once again, I just wanted to kind of reiterate that, you probably want to be around that 3. As long as you have your policies and procedures documented, you want to be around a 3 at least with all the controls before you start moving to our 4 or 5 and any of the other controls. So it's very common for organizations not to ever reach a 5 out of 5. Maybe it's quite common for organization not to even reach a 3 out of 5 for some controls, based on that process that you're gonna we'll talk through. We'll provide our feedback, our recommendations around, but ultimately that becomes a business decision if some of the controls are just an acceptable risk to the organization or if they're just not applicable.
Perfect. Thank you, Peter. The one thing I would like to add, because I have gone, I've seen a number of these assessments performed, and I've seen what organizations have chosen to prioritize in conjunction with it is very collaborative, and what is important from a CIS perspective and what is important from an organizational perspective don't always align perfectly with budget, resources, and capacity. The worksheet that Peter went through that shared what the budget for projects was, there is a section in there, and we didn't talk about it at all, really, but there's a section for time and materials and time and materials projects. And although he did mention, we can help you with those, a lot of what we're trying to identify for organizations through this process is the tools that you already have in place and how you can take advantage of those tools because certain things haven't been configured the way they could be configured. And if you as an organization have the resources, capacity, and skill to configure those things, but just weren't aware that they should be done, then we highlight that because it is a budget line item, because it's going to take somebody's resources to do that, but it doesn't have to be our resources. It becomes a partnership in which we can help you where you need our help, and we can identify for you what needs to be done, and you can determine whether those are things that you want to undertake on your own, and just have us come back in and validate or vet if it's even a requirement. But the document, the output, is something that I know my customers are telling me that they haven't had from previous assessments. They get a list of gaps, and then they have no real practical means of figuring out how and what, in which order of operation they should close those gaps, over what time frame they should close those gaps, and which ones are going to help them along that maturity path if that is a requirement or a goal that they've set for themselves. Does anybody else have any questions at all? It's a lot to take in, and you've provided us with your time, and we appreciate it very much. So I hope you reach out. You can reach out to me, and we can follow up one-on-one if that's something that you would like to do. I'd like to give John and Peter an opportunity to share anything else with the group if they have anything that they want to add. So maybe John, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Nora. Yeah, I guess a general comment, right, is there's a lot of organizations with huge bags of budget for security that aren't doing the essentials or the basic cyber hygiene. So following a framework, as Peter pointed out, even to a 1 or a 2 before you have those policies written, you're going to be much further ahead than many of your competitors or other people tackling these challenges.
That makes a lot of sense. Peter, is there anything else that you would like to add?
I think I talked enough already today. There's nothing else I can add, I think.
All right.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful day, weekend, and please follow up if there's any more information you'd like.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.